Namaste. Very good morning to everybody. Yesterday, we briefly discussed the various prakriyas that demonstrate the method of Adhyaropapavada. We have now established a foundational comprehension of its underlying structure and methodology. It is certainly not exhaustive. It serves as a mere pointer intended to guide each one of us towards understanding it correctly, applying it, recognizing it when we read the Bhashya. The onus lies on us entirely to effectively apply the approach in our own study. Today, we will look at certain misconceptions that occur when the method of Adhyaropapavada is not applied correctly. And these are mistakes that we do as well. It is not necessarily a Purvapakshan that is considered here, that is also considered here. But there are certain difficult sections, and we tend to get stuck, not know how to go forward. So, this chapter addresses these problematic areas, how to correct them, what is the correct way to understand certain very fundamental concepts, etc. So, very broadly, just a second. Very broadly, these are the topics that are covered in this particular chapter: the general misconceptions of the other schools and the special features of ShankaraprakriyA. Um, I wasn't very satisfied with our discussion of the Prakriyas yesterday because each Prakriya is so subtle, so nuanced. It's not possible to do justice to them in a very short period of time. And I feel like I was very focused on covering as many Prakriyas as possible rather than understanding at least one in depth, which is why later I realized that this is not a number game. It is not a matter of covering the syllabus. So, what I'd like to do today is focus on one aspect that will address many aspects of the different topics listed here. So, I'll focus on a single one that will indirectly address all the other topics instead of running like Shatabdi Express, covering all the destinations. I'll focus on one important one that will cover indirectly all the other topics. Everything will be coming under that, but the focus will be on one main topic. So Swami opens with opens this chapter. I've taken the English version because it's easier for most of you to follow. He opens this chapter with this quote. He says, even the followers of the ancient schools take Brahman to be the cause of the universe and agree that Jivas become one with Brahman in the state of final release. These thinkers are very particular, however, about the special means of release as taught in their respective traditions. Some of them believe that moksha or release should be assumed to be the effect of both karma and jnana, practiced in combination. Others thought that the jnana taught in the Upanishads is really upasana, meditation, since bare knowledge of things as they are will be of no avail in regard to the ultimate goal. Others were of the opinion that moksha has to be attained only after gradually dissolving every feature of difference. Some others again taught that Brahmanhood has to be attained only after constant meditation on Brahman. There were others who thought that the repeated practice of jnana arising out of the teaching of the Vedantic text, thou art that, or the repeated practice of jnana aided by reflection or manana alone would give the realization necessary to destroy all the ignorance. According to others, The knowledge obtained through the text, being a whole, composed of related parts, a non relational species of knowledge, akhandartha, has to be evolved out of constant practice of meditation on the primary knowledge before ignorance is wiped out. This quotation is rather long, it continues. Yet others averred that the ultimate good could be attained only by suppression of the impression of the three states of consciousness, waking, dream, and sound sleep, in accordance with Vedantic teaching. Another school taught that when all the modifications have been suppressed, Atman, who is self effulgent, could reveal himself to the seeker. There were yet others again who imagined that even a person who has realized Brahman would be merged in Brahman only after he had shuffled off this mortal coil. Thus, the ancient schools of Vedanta were divided in their views regarding the nature and means of release. What we see here is that the majority of Vedantins, Advaita Vedantins, contend that an additional action or practice is required subsequent to the hearing of the Shruti Vakya to attain moksha. Mere exposure to the Shruti Vakya without any additional effort or endeavor is deemed insufficient for the realization of moksha. This problem is very perfectly captured in the Sutra Bhashya, where Shankaracharya first argues that when you he gives the example where the Vakya Shravana only suffices for right knowledge. He says, when you mistake the rope for the snake, the moment you are told, you're simply told that this is a rope, not a snake. The mere hearing of this sentence, the fear you felt vanishes. So the Vastu Matra Kathana suffices to remove ignorance. He writes, Vastu Matra Kathanepi Rajjuriyam Nayam Sarpaha Ityadau Bhranti Janita Bhiti Nivartanenarthatvam Drishtam. तथेहापि असंसार्यात्मवस्तु कथनेन संसारित्व भ्रांति निवर्तनेनार्थत्वं स्यात्. So jnana, correct knowledge, is sufficient to remove ignorance, is Shankaracharya's argument. To this, the Purvapakshi, the interlocutor, he replies, Syadetadevam yadi rajjuswarupa shravanamattreneva sarpabhrantihi संसारित्व भ्रांति ब्रह्मस्वरूप श्रवण मात्रेण निवर्तेत न तु निवर्तते श्रुत ब्रह्मणोपि यथा पूर्वं सुख दुःखादि संसारी धर्म दर्शनात्. Correct. What you say would be true if ignorance was indeed removed upon hearing about the nature of Brahman. सर्पभ्रांति संसारित्व भ्रांति ब्रह्मस्वरूप श्रवण मात्रेण निवर्तेत न तो निवर्तते. But that does not happen. Shruta brahmanopi yatha purvam sukha dukkhadi samsari dharma darshanat. Even after having heard about Brahman, we continue to be bound to samsara yatha purvam, as before. Therefore, mere knowledge is not sufficient to remove ignorance. It must be strengthened by shravana, manana and nididhyasana. श्रोतव्यो मंतव्यो निदिध्यासितव्यः इति च श्रवणोत्तरकालयोर् मनन निदिध्यासनयोर् विधिदर्शनात्. But logically, how can action or meditation, action in this context usually refers to ritualistic action, but we can extend the same. How can action or meditation lead to moksha? Any action is undertaken only after the identification of the self and the not self. Only after I assume an identification with the body, with the mind, with the instruments of knowledge, is there any vyavahara. Laukika or Vaidika. Any and every action is based on adhyasa. How can any action that is performed post identification, post adhyasa, remove adhyasa that is prior to it, that is its cause? It is logically impossible. Sureshwaracharya captures this very nicely. He says, Ajnanahani matratvan muktehe karma na sadhanam कर्मापमारष्टिर्ना ज्ञानम tamasivo tamaha. To argue that action, again, action, when in Sureshwaracharya's context, refers to ritualistic action, but and we can extend it to upasana, meditation, etc. To argue that action can remove ignorance is like saying tamasivo tamaha, like saying that darkness is cancelled by darkness, can remove darkness. Darkness can remove darkness. It is logically impossible. But it is so difficult to give up this position, to give up the position, this notion that something must be done. Because, like that Purva Pakshi, we have to say, Shruta Brahmanopi Yatha Purvam Sukha Dukkhadi Samsari Dharma Darshana. How many times have we not heard Aham Brahmasmi Tattvamasi? What if it nothing happened, everything stays the same? Yatha Purvam. So, what is really meant by Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana is the topic of today's discussion. Swami writes, perhaps there is no other point of Shankara's interpretation of the Upanishads which has given rise to so many differences of opinions from his own followers as well as adverse critics as the immediate vision of Atman and its direct means. Is the so called vision a sort of immediate realization achieved through meditation and samadhi? Or is it the resultant knowledge that dawns directly from the teaching of Vedantic texts about Atman? What is Shravana? Is Manana Vedantic reasoning of the same type as reasoning employed in discussions regarding empirical phenomena? Or is it something totally different in kind? Why do Shankara and other Advaitic Vedantins repudiate Tarka and yet indulge in reasoning about Atman themselves? Is Nididhyasana a sort of meditation, upasana on the Atman as taught by the Upanishads, or something of a different nature? He continues, does this last means lead to samadhi, trance, wherein the true nature of Atman is directly realized? Or is the so called vision of Atman altogether different from that achieved in Samadhi taught by Patanjali or other yogic systems? Are all the three means to be practiced in succession before the vision of Atman is attained, or can any one of them lead to the vision itself? What is moksha or immortality to be achieved by this vision of Atman? Is it an end to be reached in this very life, or is it an eschatological result? These and other questions have puzzled many a scholar who has studied the various interpretations of Shankara. The controversy among the followers of Shankara cannot be supposed to have subsided even today, for the view of the Pandits of Vedantic lore depends on the branch of Shankara's interpretation, such as Vivarana and the Bhamati, on which each of them relies as more authoritative. So this Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana is a very, very important point of contention. So let us first look at Swami's, that is Shankaracharya's argument, how he interprets this, and then we can simply very briefly look at other interpretations for contrast. This topic discusses the Jnana Karma Samuchaya. It discusses whether moksha is an effect, whether it is something to be achieved. How does Shankaracharya see this? How does the Purva Pakshi see this? Etc. So this topic of Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana addresses a lot of the topics that is discussed in the chapter. A very pertinent text here in this context is Upadesha Sahasri. The relevant section is the 18th chapter, the Tattvamasi Prakarana, consisting of 230 shlokas. This is the longest chapter of the text and it is its philosophical centerpiece. As the title suggests, it is devoted to an analysis of the Upanishadic Vakya Tattvamasi. Sureshwaracharya's Naishkarmya Siddhi very closely follows this text, this chapter, and Swami also uses this to demonstrate his points on Shravana Manana and Nididhyasana. So we can take a look at the text itself. Shankaracharya says 100 times that moksha cannot be attained by action. While again his context is specifically ritualistic action, we are extending that argument to other actions also, meditation, upasana, etc. He says it over and over and over again. In so many different ways, he reiterates that action does not cause moksha. There's a small objection and reply. If you object to this position or premise that only Vakya is sufficient for moksha, if you object by saying Yathanubhuyate triptir bhujer Vakya na gamyate, satisfaction, tripti, occurs or is felt from eating food. It is not experienced from the sentence. If I hear about idli, dosa, bisibele bath, my stomach is not going to be full. So the Shruti Vakya is not sufficient for moksha. This is the objection. Vakyasya vidhritis tadvat goshakrit payasi kriya. He is giving the example. The interlocutor, the Purva Pakshin, is saying, you saying that the Vakya produces moksha, Vakyasya vidhritis tadvat, is like saying Goshakrita Goshakrit Payasi Kriya. It's like saying getting Payasi Kriya, milk rice, boiled milk rice from cow dung. How is it possible? Logically impossible. Cow dung cannot produce a delicious rice item, milk item. So Vakya cannot produce moksha. To this, Shankaracharya replies, in every other case, except for Atmajnana, what you say holds true. Sentences Vakya can only give rise to indirect knowledge about ob- other objects. For example, if I visit a foreign land and describe it to you, you cannot get a direct experience of it through my description. So, Vakya can produce only indirect knowledge in every case except for Atmajnana. Satyamevam anatmarthe Vakyat parokshya bodhanam Pratyagatmani natvevam Sankhya prapti vad adhruvam. It is true that only indirect knowledge arises from sentences referring to things other than Atman. But it cannot be doubted that direct knowledge arises from the sentence when the case is of the Atman. Shankaracharya refers to the story of the 10th man here, just as the 10th man was obtained from the sentence, you are the 10th. This 10th man story is actually such a perfect analogy. Unfortunately, it has been repeated so many times that it has lost its value, but it's truly a fantastic analogy. Shankaracharya refers to it and says only in the case of Atman, the Vakya suffices. There's nothing else to be done to achieve it. Now we face an objection. You say that the Atman is self evident, it is ever free, ever attained. Yet, the Shruti says Shrotavyaha, Mantavyaha, Nididhyasitavyaha. Look at the pratyaya that is being employed here. It is the Tavyat pratyaya. So much of hair splitting analysis is done in Purvamimamsa regarding the Vidhiling Lakara, the Tavyat Pratyaya. Why? Because the Karma Kanda is primarily Vidhi, it is injunction, it is Chodana, incitement to act. And it usually employs these affixes, vidhiling or tavyat. For example, if the Veda says yajeta, here the dhatu yaja is in the vidhiling lakara. It is the usage of this pratyaya, this vidhiling lakara in this word that impels a person to perform the yajna. So the Vedas employ these affixes very carefully. Now the interlocutor says here in this context, Shrotavya contains the Tavyat Pratyaya, which is usually employed only when you are inciting the person into action. Why would the Shruti employ this unless it meant that there is an action that is involved? अशनायादि निर्मुक्तः सिद्धो मोक्षस्त्वमेव सः श्रोत्यादि तवेत्येतत् विरुद्धं कथमुच्यते. To this Shankaracharya replies, what you say would hold true if moksha were something to be attained, if it was something to be achieved. सेत्स्यतीत्येव चेत् तत् स्यात् श्रवणादि तदा भवेत्. What you say would hold true if there was a difference between the hearer and the object to be heard. Shrotavyayor bhedo yadishtah syat bhavet. So what is he suggesting then? What is Shankaracharya's solution to the problem that even after having heard Tattvamasi, business continues as usual? What is the solution to this? Shankaracharya says, if the Vakya Tattvamasi does not lead to right knowledge, that is, the realization of the true nature of the self, it is because of the lack of clarity of the meaning of the word Tvam in Tattvamasi. The meaning of Tvam is unclear. Vakye Tattvamasi Tyasmin Jnatartham Tadasidvayam. In this Vakya Tattvamasi, the meaning of two words are clear, Tat and Asi. This we know. Tvamarthas Smritya Sahayat Vakyam Notpada Yet Pramam. But because of the absence of assistance to recollect the meaning of the word Tvam, Tvamartha Smritya Asahayat, the sentence will not produce right knowledge. It is this lack of clarity of the meaning of the word Tvam that necessitates further discussion. The word Tvam with its contexts and predicates has to be investigated so that the Vakya can have its desired soteriological impact. He reiterates this several times. Tattvamasyadi Vakyeshu Tvam Padartha Vivekataha व्यज्यते नैव वाक्यार्थो नित्यमुक्तोऽहमित्यतः. यदा नित्येषु वाक्येषु पदार्थस्तु विविच्यते वाक्यार्थज्ञानसङ्क्रान्त्यै तदा प्रश्नो न युज्यते. This question itself will not arise in a context where the Tvam Padartha is clear. Okay? How to know this Tvam Padartha then? What is the method? So, Shankaracharya says, the solution that he offers is Viveka, discrimination. Vivekatmadhiya dukkam nudyate chalanadivat aviveka svabhavena manogachatya nichataha. By discriminating knowledge, namely the right notion of Atman, pain is removed like motion, etc. Since the mind is by nature devoid of discriminating knowledge, it roams without desiring to do so. This is the translation. Viveka is not like action in the usual sense of the term, nor is it like upasana and meditation, where there is a difference posited between the object and the subject of meditation. Here, the entire effort, and yes, we are talking about a certain effort, the entire effort is directed towards ascertaining what this Sampadartha is or what this Aham Padartha is. This is unlike other actions, and Upanishadic analogy is Munjat ishikam iva, the katha, when it says angushthamatraha purushaha, antaratma, sada jananam hridaye sannipishtaha, munjat ishikama iva, svat sharirat tam dhairyena prabhed. This Purusha, ever seated in the heart, one must separate him with patience from one's own body as one separates a blade of grass from its main fiber. Here, Shankaracharya suggests the method of Anvaya and Vyatireka as a means to achieve this Viveka of the Tvam Padartha, or rather the Aham Padartha. This is a very specific method, this Anvaya Vyatireka, which is tracing the constant reality through all the variable appearances. It is a form of Adhyaropapavada. It is discussed only in the Upadesha Sahasri and the Naishkarmya Siddhi, not really found in this way in the other texts, the other bhashyas, but it's a very important method. In a few verses preceding this, Shankaracharya explains that the very purpose of Anvaya Vyatireka is to assist the remembering of the proper word meaning. Anvaya Vyatirekoktihi padartha smaranayatu smritya bhave na vakyartho jnatum shakyo vikenachit. Without a discriminating understanding of Tvam, Tvam Padartha Avivekataha, the purport of the sentence Tattvamasi will not become manifest. So the reference to the method of Anvaya Vyatireka is for the sake of such discriminative understanding and for no other purpose. Anvaya Vyatirekoktis Vivekaya Nanyatha Tvam Padartha Vivekehi Panavarpita Vilvavat. This is Shankaracharya's in Upadesha Sahasri. According to Shankaracharya, Anvaya Vyatireka supports the hearing, Shravana of the Vakyas insofar as it serves to eliminate confusions and superimpositions from our understanding and from our usage of words such as Aham and Tvam. How does it do this? It does this by juxtaposing the continued presence of the pure subject of awareness, I, with the discontinuity of its objectifiable contents. By exposing the continued applicability of the word I in contexts where the connotations of spatio-temporal particularity, which are habitually associated with I, have disappeared. In Upadesha Sahasri, Shankaracharya says, Nadrakramaham ityasmin sushuptenyan managape navarayati drishtim swam pratyayantu nishedhati. In thinking, I did not see anything else at all in the state of deep sleep. One does not deny his own seeing. Navarayati drishtim, but negates his own notions. Here the word aham is linked to the predicate na adraksham, which excludes all connotations of the spatio-temporal particularity, whereby the continuity of seeing, drishti, that is that of awareness as such, is coordinated with the discontinuity or absence of all its object contents, all the pratyayas. The anvaya of one element is juxtaposed with the vyatireka of all others, and its continued presence is seen as indicating its independence from these other factors. If we take X as a particular mental state, such as dreaming, and I as consciousness. Now, according to Anvaya Vyatireka, when X occurs, I exists or I occurs. When X is absent, I exists. Here, I is not the aham pratyaya that comes and goes. I'm talking about what is present at all times through the three states of being, waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, that which cannot be absent. This correlation, anvaya, of consciousness with the different physical and mental states forms the crux of the method of Anvaya and Vyatireka. Yala writes, one cannot escape from one's own consciousness, nor can one directly separate a particular mental state from consciousness, because consciousness itself is not mutually exclusive of anything and not subject to the negative instance of Vyatireka. However, separating consciousness in a particular mental state is possible because states such as dream reality and waking reality are mutually exclusive. This indicates that consciousness is independent of them even though it persists or is present in both. Through Anvaya and Vyatireka, one discriminates consciousness as underlying the three other states of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, which are themselves adventitious, not intrinsic properties of consciousness. Of course, the three states is also not entirely, we will not go into Avasthatare. Shankaracharya specifically employs this reasoning to determine the relationship between what persists and what does not persist between two things. Through this method, he shows that one term is independent of the other. He does not always use this expression Anvaya and Vyatireka when he refers to this continuity and discontinuity as a means of achieving Viveka, discrimination. Sometimes he uses such terms as Vyabhichara, Abhyavichara. This is the case in the second prose chapter of the Upadesha Sahasri, which is a highly concentrated effort to separate the essential nature of the Atman from everything that is adventitious or accidental, agantuka, from the changing phenomenon of the states of waking and dreaming, and in general from all objective data. Vyabhichara, Abhyabhichara are the guidelines of this analytic procedure. What is essential never deviates or departs, while what is accidental may always be discontinued and cease to accompany what is essential. Kincha swapnajagarite न तव आत्मभूते व्यभिचारित्वात् न हि यस्य यत् स्वरूपं तद् व्यभिचारि दृष्टम् स्वप्नजागृते तो चैतन्यमात्रत्वात् व्यभिचरतः. The states of dreaming and waking are not your essence, since they may depart from you, just as your clothes, etc. It never occurs that the essence of something departs from it, but the states of dreaming and waking depart from consciousness. Shankaracharya goes on to emphasize that this non-deviating essence persists in deep sleep, since only the objective contents, the drishta, are denied in this state, but not the drishti. Pashyamstarhi sushupte tvam yasmad drishtam eva pratishedhasi na drishtim. Earlier also he said na vareti drishtim swam pratyantu nishedhati, which we just saw. This is meant to illustrate the method of Anvaya Vyatireka introduced in the preceding verse. While Upadesha Sahasri is the only text where Shankaracharya explicitly uses the term Anvaya Vyatireka, there are certain other expositions can be likened to this method. For example, in his commentary on the Brahma Sutra, Shankaracharya relates the story of Prajapati and the vital organs. In order to determine which among them is superior to the others, Prajapati asks them to depart successively from the body. And it turns out that only breath, prana, is indispensable, since the body and all the other organs could not subsist without it. So, through this successive departure, the superiority of prana is ascertained according to the method of continuity and discontinuity. एकैकोत्क्रमणेन अन्वयव्यतिरेकाभ्यां प्राणश्रैष्ठ्यप्रतिपत्तिः. This is obviously not a technical context. Still, the expression ekaikotkamana can be taken as a graphic paraphrase of what Shankaracharya has in mind when he refers to Anvaya Vyatireka as a method of clarifying the meaning of Tvam. The non-essentials may leave. What is essential will stay. So Shankaracharya repeatedly refers to this simile of the extraction of the munja grass from its stalk. And this is also often used as the most familiar in illustrations of the procedure of this Anvaya-Vyatireka. It should be noted that in these passages, Shankaracharya does not use Vyabhichara in the logical or epistemological perspective. That is, in the sense of logical deviation of an inferential reason, hetu, being present without its sadhya. In his usage, Vyabhichara and the corresponding verb forms do not indicate an unaccompanied presence, but a failure to be present in a relationship of concomitance. It is an ontological defect than a logical one. So Shankaracharya also argues against the use of Anvaya Vyatireka in the context of ordinary worldly assumptions. He writes that Anvaya Vyatireka as a worldly dialectical device can easily be turned around. It has to be used only in the light of your own anubhava, not merely as an intellectual exercise. It is groundless in itself, has no legitimate direction if it is not guided by the Shruti and Anubhava. Reasoning in terms of Anvaya Vyatireka, of the mutual deviation, itaretara vyabhichara, of the states of consciousness has to be legitimized by the Veda itself. This is what Shankaracharya emphasizes repeatedly in connection with his statements against dry or fruitless reasoning, the Shushka Tarka. Shrutyanugrihita eva hyatra tarko anubhavangatvena ashriyate. स्वप्नांत बुद्धांतयोर उभयोर इतरेतर व्यभिचारात् आत्मनो अनन्वागतत्वम्. So only when such reasoning, which is approved by Veda, is here referred to as being conducive to true experience. Because of their mutual deviation, both dreaming and waking do not belong to the essence of the self. So if the Shruti Shravana is preceded by a determination of the Tvam Padartha through Anvaya Vyatireka, it will do what it should. Anvaya Vyatireka Purassaram Vakyameva Avakyartharupam Atmanam Pratipadayati. So it's important also to note that liberating knowledge cannot be brought about by Anvaya Vyatireka alone. Natu Anvaya Vyatireka Matra Sadhyoyam Arthaha. He who has practiced the method of continuity and discontinuity with reference to the problem of self and not self has met an essential preliminary requirement of liberating knowledge. It is part of his adhikara, his soteriological qualification or competence, and it can be added to the other requirements such as shamadamadi. The discriminative knowledge achieved through the method of Anvaya Vyatireka does not anticipate the liberating insight which comes from the Shruti Vakya, nor is there a gradual transition from one to the other. It remains in the sphere of Bheda, of mutual exclusion and non-being, the Abhava. I cannot realize the absolute non-duality of the truth, of the self. So to him who has freed himself from false superimpositions by reasoning in this way, who has discarded the whole sphere of objects, and who asks in bewilderment, who am I? Kosmi, who may even think that he himself has been discarded, tyaktoham, in this process, to him the Veda speaks in a meaningful and soteriologically effective manner when it says Tattvamasi. Anvaya Vyatireka as a method of separating non-self from self and of analyzing the meaning of Tvam in Tattvamasi illustrates the significance that reasoning has in Shankaracharya's exegetical and soteriological thought. But does this mean that Yukti alone is capable of uncovering the ultimate, though indirect reference to Tvam? No, that is not possible. In Shankaracharya's understanding, the Upanishads respond to human reason, appeal to it, provide it with the context, goal, and basis. They contain so many hints, implicit patterns of reasoning that they seem to anticipate all merely human intellectual efforts. Halfras writes, the Upanishads are not a set of dogmas against which human reason would have to revolt or assert itself, but rather a source to which it traces itself and its own legitimacy, a universe of meaning which it can exercise its potential without having to proclaim its autonomy, and to which it can subordinate itself without having to sacrifice itself. Swami writes, Vedantic reason is distinguished from other types of reasoning in that it rests upon direct intuition and is no mere speculation based upon empirical logic. The following verse from Upadesha Sahasri states that the nature of Vedantic reasoning succinctly. अन्वयव्यतिरेकौ हि पदार्थस्य पदस्य च स्यादेतदहमित्यत्र युक्तिरेवावधारणे. Constant continuance and variability of the word and the thing denoted by it respectively would be the reason in deciding what is meant by the term I. While in common parlance, the word I is applied to the body, the senses, the vital principle, the mind, and the intellect, as the case may be, yet it is clear that the notion of I continues even when the not selves disappear altogether, thus compelling us to conclude that the entity corresponding to this notion is none of these. That this is so is proved by an appeal to the experience of deep sleep in the next two verses. Nadraksham, we have seen this already. The Shastra has thus declared the existence of consciousness and its unchangeability on the one hand, and the disappearance of the concept on the other, thus distinguishing the concept and consciousness. The quotation continues. The idea is that the witnessing consciousness alone should be regarded as indicated by the word I when we refer to the intuition of deep sleep, since there is no question of any concept continuing to thrive there. The Shruti expressly refers to both the self identity of the witness thriving there and the absence of the concept. This is an anvaya, constant continuation of the word I together with the entity meant by it, as also the Vyatireka, the absence of, the not self wrongly presumed to be denoted by it in common life. Thus, by observing this constancy and the fleeting nature of Padartha and Pada as testified by intuition, Vedanta determines the reality and unreality of things and not by syllogistic reasoning or dry speculation. Nididhyasana, on the other hand, means fixing the mental gaze on the principle of reality to determine its true nature, like one examining a jewel. A candidate practicing meditation in the form of upasana must select one of the meditations laid down for attaining to the Lord as associated with attributes and maintain the same image in his mind according to the dictates of the Vedas until he has obtained immediate vision of the object of his meditation. For meditation realizes its true end when it is used as a means to direct vision. But its reward is attainment of absolute in its lower form at a later time, after death, in the world of Brahma. Here, there is enjoyment of the same experience as the Lord. And at the end of the world period, the final metaphysical knowledge will arise and there will be deferred release in company with Brahma. Such is the teaching of the Veda. I'll continue. This is all Swami's, it's an excerpt from Swami's quotation itself. The aim of the one practicing sustained meditation, nididhyasana, is different. He tries to attain direct vision of reality here in this very world by turning his mind away from all else. And there is difference as against upasana, that after the rise of knowledge, nothing further remains to be done. It is this sustained meditation that is referred to at Kathopanishad by the name Adhyatma Yoga. In the Gita, it is sometimes called Dhyana Yoga. In the Mandukya Karikas, it is called restraint of the mind. Its nature is described there in that latter work. Everywhere, its result is described in the same way as right metaphysical knowledge, and from this comes immediate liberation, Sadhyo Mukti. Shankaracharya deals with this extensively in his, Sureshwaracharya deals with this extensively in his Naishkarmya Siddhi. The entire text is dedicated to understanding how the Shruti Vakya leads to Brahmajnana. In the Naishkarmya Siddhi, he also discusses many Purvapaksha stands. Of them, there are three Purvapakshis who discuss different interpretations of this Tattvamasi Vakya. So these three pre-Shankara Vedantic systems that held different views regarding the sadhana of moksha. So the three schools are, the first one, ahanyahane dragiyasakaleen upasinasya sato bhavanopachayat. This particular Vedantic tradition argues that only when the mind becomes saturated, completely accumulated by means of prolonged meditation, is it removed without a residue. This is attributed to Brahmadatta, but we're not sure of it. Another tradition, Sri Shankara, held that knowledge that is derived from Shruti Vakya, samsargatmakatvat, because it is a combination of interrelated concepts. So over and beyond it, an avakyartha must arise. And for this, the sadhaka must meditate on the thought produced by the Shruti Vakya. This is also refuted in the Vartika by Sureshwaracharya. Yet another school that Sureshwaracharya criticizes in his Naishkarmya Siddhi is the Prasankhyana, which we discussed on the first day. In post-Shankaradvaita, there's Vachaspati Mishra's commentary on the Brahma Sutra. Samadhyabhavacha, this sutra he comments, he says, Samadhiriti Sanyamam upalakshayate Dharanadhyana Samadhayohi Sanyamapada Vedaniyaha Atra Shrotavyo Mantavyaha iti Dharanopadeshaha Nididhyasitavyaha iti Dhyanopadeshaha Drashtavyaha iti Samadherupadeshaha. Vachaspati uses the concepts of dharana, dhyana, samadhi of the Yoga Darshana here. The third pada, the Vibhuti pada of the Yoga Sutras, begins with a description of this antaranga, the internal auxiliaries of the Ashtanga Yoga, which is dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, translated as fixation, meditation, absorption. Dharana is fixation, to choose a particular object of focus, fix the attention on it. Deshabandha chittasya dharana. Dhyana, meditation, is when the attention or awareness flows continuously, uninterruptedly towards the chosen object of focus. It does not waver. Tasmin deshe pratyayasyaikatanata sadrisha. I forget the exact definition. There is a very clear definition of dhyana which indicates that it is concentration or meditation. Samadhi is complete absorption. When the mind becomes swarupa shunyam, it is devoid of its reflective nature. Only the object shines forth as the only content of consciousness. This state is called samadhi. Patanjali refers to this triplet, the dharana, dhyana, samadhi, as sanyama, complete control. This is irrelevant in Shankaracharya's line of thought. But Vachaspati Mishra very boldly concludes that the Atman is to be seen as a means of experience in samadhi. Vivaranakara, in his turn, writes, Vidya uditapi na pratishtham labhate. Even correct knowledge which has dawned does not attain stability. Asambhavanabhibhuta vishayatvat. Asambhavana, see, it is if it's impossible, if the object of attainment is, if you're clouded by doubts, suspicion of his impossibility, improbability. See, he gives the example, tathacha lokesmin deshe kale chedam vastu swarupata eva na sambhavati iti dृढभावितं यदि तत् कथञ्चित् दैववशात् उपलभ्येत तदा स्वयमीक्षमाणोऽपि तावन्नाध्यवस्यते यावत् तत् सम्भवं नानुसरति. Even in ordinary world, if a man is not convinced that a particular thing, some worldly object, that it cannot exist at a given time and place, loke asmin deshe kale chedam च idam vastu swarupata eva na sambhavati iti dृढभावितम्. If by chance, by accidentally, he happens to see it at that time and place, यदि तत् कथञ्चित् दैववशात् उपलभ्येत tada swayam ikshamaanopi, even if he is seeing it himself, he is not able to believe it unless and until he follows it up with reason that supports its probability. He will not believe it. Yavat tat sambhavam nanusarati. Tena samyak jnanam api swavishaye apratishthita manavaptamiva bhavati. Even correct knowledge of an object becomes unstable as though it were not attained. Okay. Anavaptam iva bhavati. तेन तत्स्वरूपप्रतिष्ठायै तर्कं सहायी करोति. अत एव प्रमाणानाम् अनुग्राहकस्तर्कः इति तर्कविदः. Hence, it demands the aid of reason for its stability. That is why the proficient in logic say that tarka, which is that which supposes a valid means of knowledge. This is the Vivaranakara. Each of these Vedantic schools offer an array of distinct modes of action and meditation that apparently help in the attainment of moksha, in the removal of avidya. But each of them is founded in avidya itself. They rely on the distinction of a subject, object, means of knowledge in order to undertake the action or meditation. In contrast, Shankaracharya's method of discrimination, Viveka, it sets itself apart from these methods with a very distinctive approach. Swamiji very beautifully explicates the distinctions between the two modes of inquiry. He says, unlike the Advaitins belonging to the pre-Shankara, post-Shankara schools, Shankara discusses the doctrine of seeing, hearing of, reflecting upon, and knowing the true Atman without any assumption that there is any actual seeing, hearing of, reflecting upon, or knowing of Atman as an object. This is the key word. It is not known as an object. According to him, the distinction of the Jiva from Brahman, as well as the inquiry into the true nature of Atman, is only in the empirical sphere projected by avidya. And this is the reason why we discuss the Vyakyanakara's position time and again, just to contrast them with Shankaracharya's. Samalochanasya phalam tu bhashyakara sampradaya mata. This is Swami's line itself, I forget. Prakriyayaha vaishishtya buddhidhardyarthameva. We say something like that. But we will, by seeing this, we see that as in the Shravana Manana and Nididhyasana, according to the Upadesha Sahasri of Shankaracharya, we saw how Jnana Karma Samuchayavada is untenable. We saw how the Upanishads are not injunctive. They do not give commands or vidhis for Shravana Manana and Nididhyasana. It is not a vidhi vakya like it is a karma in the karma kanda. We also saw that moksha is not an effect, that is a result of action or upasana, etc. And we also saw that there is no actual destruction of avidya, the way it is posited in the different schools. And what is distinctive about Shankaracharya's method is the fact that the Shruti and the Tarka is according or in line with Anubhava. It is Anubhava Anusari. It has to be in line with it, only then is it useful. The moment you apply logic without Anubhava, it takes you far away from the actual pristine pure teachings of Shankaracharya. This is what Swami's primary concern was, that the tarka that is being used is not in line with Anubhava. The only thing that Shankaracharya accepted was this tarka, which is not what is used in the other traditions of Advaita Vedanta. And with this, we'll conclude today's session. Continue with tomorrow's session. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.